Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition and the Path Builder app. If you somehow miss the title and thumbnail, you may be asking yourself, what could be on the docket for today's Full Build Friday? That, my lovely but apparently blind viewers, is the question. It's a return to the world of comics to concoct a culmination of this curious conspirator, which kicks off by laying out some build goals. An orphan and student of hard knocks, Charles Victor better known as Vic Sage, went to college for journalism and eventually landed a job as a TV reporter and an investigative journalist. One of the few good ones. He had a tendency to push for stories that led him to being approached by a scientist who talked about a mystery regarding a discovery called pseudoderm. Now, pseudoderm was toxic, had some toxic properties, but Vic put a stop to it. In the course of his investigation, he actually used the pseudoderm himself to disguise his face, hiding it behind blank features. His blank face enhances his ability to disguise himself and infiltrate a variety of operations, but it is adhered to his face with a specialized binary gas that he can also use to create a smokescreen at times. While originally a bit of a brawler, he eventually sought out training and became a highly capable martial artist. Despite this training, he has never shown hesitation in using a variety of firearms when the situation calls for it, and has specifically demonstrated proficiency with pistols, submachine guns, and even rocket launchers. However, his greatest weapon has always remained his genius-level intellect, and his knowledge in regards to journalism, interrogation, and investigation. His mind is keen enough that he is sometimes referred to as the league's second best detective, following Batman, and on a much tighter budget. Surprisingly, he has also delved into mysticism, and even learned a handful of magics that he can conjure, mostly to sharpen his senses, or trick and deceive others. Now, where exactly does that leave us? Well, it should come together into a TV reporter turned faceless vigilante, who is able to don a wide variety of disguises. A highly capable detective known for chasing down conspiracies, he's a handy brawler who won't hesitate to use firearms or magic when the situation calls for it. With that all covered, why don't we go ahead and get into the build for this inquisitive individual. We start as we always do by asking ourselves, what's the best ancestry for the question? Well, I think the human ancestry serves Vic well here, taking the versatile heritage to make him fleet. This increase will help him sneak a little bit faster, since sneaking does have your speed, and I refrain from using the skilled heritage just because Vic gets more than enough skill increases. For his ancestry feat, we'll take up Arcane Tattoos for Figment, or as it was previously called, Ghost Town. This reflects his exploration into the magical and mystical studies, and I do think Figment is best for helping him distract and throw off enemies. I looked at a lot of backgrounds for the question, ranging from Barker to a very brief consideration of Detective, but I landed on the Truth Seeker background. I would personally ignore the flavor of this related to the adventure path it comes from, and instead focus on the idea of it being somebody possessed to uncover the truth of things, which lends to Question's characterization in Justice League Unlimited, if not elsewhere. Ironically, this background makes him trained in deception and politics lore, and gets him the Lie to Me skill feat from it. This is a really handy feat for the Question, using his deception skill and verbal trickery to overcome the attempted deceit of others. This leaves the Question's class, and just what could it be? Well, if you've been paying attention to the clues I've been dropping, you may have already puzzled out the Investigator. Maybe it's my lack of familiarity with this class, it was always a hard one to build for, but I don't think too much has changed from the pre-master to the remaster. It's mostly some changes in wording, though Devise a Stratum can now bolster your mental-based skill checks involving the target, and there is a small change with the methodology that the Question will be using. Given his name and his tactics, we'll be taking up the interrogation methodology, which I think is the first time that I haven't used the empiricism methodology for an investigator. This grants him access to the pointed question action, which now leaves an enemy off guard when you pop this question on them. He can only do this once per creature per hour, but it's still an extra handy trick for him to have in his back pocket. This methodology does net him no cause for alarm, which is pretty fitting for a hero, but he'll spend his actual class feat on That's Odd. This will help him figure out clues and other things being out of place, though it remains something that made trouble GMs having to use and keep track of. There's also a slew of skills for this sleuth, and while he is trained in diplomacy due to his methodology, he also becomes trained in acrobatics, arcana, athletics, crafting, intimidation, occultism, society, stealth, and thievery. Intelligence should be the question's primary ability score, with strength and dexterity being not too far behind. Charisma will also be important for some of this character's other tactics, including his pointed question and options such as demoralize and feint. We're going to be taking a slight detour at second level so that the question can take the vigilante dedication. This allows him to more fully separate his two identities, making it harder for other characters to suss out the connection between the two. Now, as somebody who has no hesitation when it comes to using underhanded methods, the question will also pick up a new skill feat, the Dirty Trick skill feat. It actually harkens back to Pathfinder First Edition, but it'll allow him to place penalties on others using thievery, though it is a little disappointing that it has the attack trait. This can be a great use of an action if you know your devised stratagem isn't going to work, to set up your allies instead. Finally, to facilitate some further aspects of this build, our first skill increase will go to Deception, making the question an expert in it. Aiding in investigations at 3rd level is Thorough Search, allowing the question to more fully inspect an area to suss out any clues that might be about. Helping him infiltrate these places is Quick Disguise as his skill feat, referencing his ability to adjust the pseudoderm and apply different disguises to it. Then, in something that might just be a little bit backwards, he will increase his thievery to expert so that he can better use the dirty trick that he picked up at last level. A return to Investigator includes an introduction to the Person of Interest class feat. The question has a lot of little tricks that he can pull off with his actions, and he can use this ability to pick out a target and turn a devised stratagem against them into a free action for 1 minute. This opens up the other actions that he can use considerably for a small investment, and with that extra action, he can certainly fit in Bon Mot. This takes advantage of his diplomacy, which will get increased to expert at this level, and lowers the mental defenses of a target, making them more susceptible to things such as pointed question, demoralize, or feint. The question can expand on his arcane tattoos with ornate tattoos to pick up illusory disguise, based on both his ability to disguise himself as well as the mysticism that he has dabbled in. His skill feat, which he gains as part of his skillful lesson class feature, is alchemical crafting. He uses this to create the binary gas that allows him to apply the pseudoderm, as well as create smoke screens. For this, I would take smoke grenades, or whatever they're called now, as well as silver-tongue mutagens, which will enhance his deception ability. My first introduction to the question as a character was through Justice League Unlimited, where he was portrayed as a conspiracy theorist that managed to actually discover a vast interconnected conspiracy, and to that end, he takes up Connect the Dots as his class feat at 6th level. While this is very flavorful, it also serves to reflect his place in teams such as the aforementioned Justice League. Now, what to take for the question's skill feat? Well, could there be anything more appropriate than Discreet Inquiry for our investigator? This allows him to pose questions without arousing suspicion, befitting his character. As for his skill increase, he will boost Stealth up to being expert in it. 7th level sees the question taking up Prescient Planner. Why, you may ask? Because the question is a sharp and clever man, who tries to stay 2 steps ahead of his foes, and we can reflect that with this general feat. Then, given his familiarity with magic as well as the secret identity he maintains, he grabs Slippery Secrets as his skill feat, which is facilitated by a skill increase to Deception to help him disguise his thoughts. He's back to the Vigilante dedication to grab Many Guises as his class feat at 8th level, considerably enhancing his ability to disguise himself. His skill feat here will be Eyes of the City, which is inspired by some of the magic that he is purported to know, with the idea that he can mystically communicate with a city to track others down. Aiding him in this effort is an increase to diplomacy that makes him a master in the skill. What better way to spend the question's ancestry feat at 9th level than on multi-talented, so that he can take a monk dedication. This enhances the power of his fist strikes and allows him to deal lethal damage, intended to represent his training and refinement of his hand-to-hand combat skills. A Might More Magic for a Magnificent Man makes him able to trick magic items with his skill feat, letting him use magical tools that he has snagged during his exploit. Now, to rewind just a hair, part of that monk dedication will make him trained in survival, while his actual skill increase makes him a master in intimidation. For the question's 10th level class feat, I had to take Whodunit, It's the only investigator feat with a question mark in its name, which makes it a must in my book. This also lets you ask questions of the GM that he must answer, so that's kind of fun. Slippery Prey as a skill feat then is going to help him escape from binds and the likes for those times when the villains think they've got the tables turned on him. While his normal skill increase makes him a master in thievery, a boost to intelligence does also make him trained in performance. Following the question's prescient planner, he uses prescient consumables so that he can always have a smoke bomb on hand for when he needs to make those quick getaways. As for his 11th level skillful lesson, he takes dubious knowledge, ensuring that when he can't remember everything, he at least recalls something. However, rather than boosting one of his recall knowledge skills to help this, he will instead become a master in stealth through a skill increase. At 12th level, the question can do a little something to empower his pointed question with the Make 'em Sweat class feat. This applies the Frightened condition on top of the Off Guard, which stacks to leave an enemy, at least briefly, at a -3 to their armor class. What is nice about this is that it will benefit the rest of the question's team instead of solely himself. As to his skill feat, I would take Swift Sneak to take advantage of his increased stealth and let him sneak at full speed, which may be important for him infiltrating sites of investigation. He also receives a skill increase, which does come from being an investigator, and I would go one of two ways. I would either start increasing athletics or a knowledge skill up to expert, though I personally went for the former here. The question can use natural ambition at 13th level to reach back and take Underworld Investigator from his class feats. I don't think he's the type of character to really associate with the underworld outside of his vigilante vocation, but getting his Pursue Elite bonus on thievery checks should be nice, especially when it comes to palming items from others.
The key was mine. Now, this list of container ship arrivals I palmed while they were yelling at you, that's the clue.
Combining with his use of smokescreens and the like, I included Fleeing Diversion as a skillful lesson, to let him disappear on enemies. He's no Batman, but I could see him pulling it off to leave people asking questions. Now if he didn't go for a knowledge skill last level, I'd take expertise in society here, since that is going to be most of what he faces off against. How does the question further explore his monk dedication? Which I took over martial artist archetype given his association with mysticism. Well, by taking up basic kata for the stumbling stance. This gives him a higher damage unarmed attack that remains agile while also including backstabber, which will allow him to take advantage of the off guard from his pointed question or from doing feints. The other option with backstabber from the monk was wolf stance, but I think stumbling is actually a little bit stronger. Subjective truth is a skill feat granted by the question's vigilante archetype, which might be a better fit for Batman, but I do think it's a really solid one for him as well. Now depending on how you're feeling for the character, I'd increase either society or athletics to master with this skill increase. The question has a lot of debuffs that he can throw out there, so to help his team make the most of them and to get the drop on the doers of devilish deeds, he uses Incredible Initiative as his 15th level general feat. He doesn't get as much use out of this as a rogue would, but it's still nice to get that Frighten from Make 'em Sweat out there early. Now personally I would spend his skill increase here on Diplomacy, making him a legend in it, which will allow him to make use of legendary negotiation. Before he was a vigilante, Vic was a reporter. The man has a gift for gab, and this lets him bring that to the forefront. We are going classic Columbo for level 16 with the good ol' just one more thing.
One more thing.
I wish this applied to pointed question, it feels like it should, but it's a nice recovery for when he messes up with one of his social skills. And actually, on that topic, an increase to deception makes him a legend in it, which will, again, allow him to take Reveal Machinations. This is a skill feat that is almost as fun as Scared to Death, which is a platinum standard for skill feats to me, and I think this is fun with the question using his knowledge of what's going on to pull the wool over his enemy's eyes. While there is kind of a point where some heroes rally after the question gets kidnapped, gets beaten up, heroic presence still doesn't sit quite right with me. However, the sad reality is that humans still haven't gotten any neat 17th level ancestry feats, even with the remaster, and the question is at least a hero, so we'll just roll with it. In what might be a first for the entirety of my builds, I'm going to take Eye for Numbers here. The sole reason I'm doing this is that they finally added value to it with a remaster by including a bonus on feint or creative diversion checks you followed up with. As for his skill increase, he'll become a legend in thievery to better pull off those dirty tricks. I've talked about the question disguising himself previously, and he can make the moment he unveils himself count with, "It was me all along." Man, this build is really just a bunch of really classic lines, like one-liners and stuff. That's kind of funny. But this creates a fortune effect, so it won't stack with Devise a Stratagem, but it's a fun and very thematic opener if nothing else. Where disarmament will help him disable any traps or snares, befitting a hero who has put a stop to his fair share of Doomsday devices. We'll also use a skill increase here to become a legend in Intimidation. For the question's general feat at 19th level, True Perception seems like a must-have to allow him to see the truth of things. His ability as a detective and his minor skills as a sorcerer allowing him to pierce even supernatural veils. Then, to aid in his infiltration missions, he takes up Confabulator so that he can pile on lie after lie to maintain his charade. Become a legend in stealth will help in these efforts on the more physical side of things. What's the best way to round out the questions build? How about a nice old-fashioned everyone's a suspect for his 20th level class feat? This is a particular fit for the paranoia of his JLU version, and ensures that he can devise a stratagem as a free action, as long as he interacts with a target for at least a minute. And that legendary diplomacy of his might just actually allow that to happen. I'd spend his skill feat on legendary sneak, letting him all but disappear to gather clues before he gets found out. A boost to intelligence will make him trained in medicine, and one final skill increase makes him a legend in society. What about a free archetype game, you may ask? Well, you could take the Vigilante's startling appearance, but I don't think it entirely fits the character. And aside from an earlier dip into the monk archetype, I actually think this build could benefit from another multi-class. Maybe something along the lines of an alchemist or a caster archetype, as the association is deeper than I initially realized. I took a lot of the investigator feats that I liked, but you could possibly slip in a quick draw, so that if Devise a Stratagem is looking like a crit, the question can whip out a dueling pistol for one hell of a crack shot. How are you feeling about this build? Well, before you answer, let's go ahead and review. The question is a versatile human investigator who employs the interrogation methodology and has a background as a truth seeker, which ignores the lore implications of the AP it came from to instead focus on Vic's dogged pursuit of the truth. This hard-boiled hero hides his identity behind that of the question through his vigilante dedication, and expands on the disguises he can adopt with many guises, quick disguise, and the illusory disguise granted by his ornate tattoos. Some alchemical crafting can help him in these endeavors, while also representing the binary gas that he will sometimes use to distract foes. This, in conjunction with his fleeing diversion, resembles his use of the binary gas to create a smokescreen to confound his enemies. He can use knuckle dusters to start with, or just his fist, but he eventually invests in a monk dedication, based on the martial arts training that he eventually underwent, while Stumbling Stance further explores that aspect of him, while also taking advantage of the off-guard that he can create with feints or his pointed questions. His interrogation methodology references both his superhero identity and natural inquisitiveness, specifically as one of DC's greatest detectives. Feats like whodunit, connect the dots, and that's odd make him a highly capable investigator, while no cause for alarm from his methodology and heroic presence are reflective of his role as a hero. His use of firearms isn't entirely covered in his kit, but is something that he could very easily pick up and wield with few issues beyond itemization. Finally, to cover his meager forays into magic, he takes into flavors a few choices, such as arcane tattoos, eyes of the city, and trick magic item. With his identity obscured through his vigilante dedication and a multitude of disguises from feats like many guises, the question chases down his conspiracies with pointed questions, connecting the dots, and an endless curiosity. His ability to devise a stratagem aids in his brawling, though he eventually refines it with a monk dedication. Even still, he occasionally slips in some legitimate magic with the likes of arcane and ornate tattoos. With a display devoid of details, this daring detective delves into difficult dilemmas with dauntless daring do, dueling dastardly devils with his dukes. Be sure to let me know how you like this build, and what others you'd like to see. You can check out the other builds I've done, or see item suggestions for this build, over on the Monster Monday blog or Twitter, linked below. Now, before you leave, I do have one last question for you, which you can find on the polls option here as I take a look at what builds to start remastering. That is it for now, though. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic Friday.
This whole trip might just prove the kids shouldn't eat nachos before bed.
Peanut butter sandwiches.
How did you... What? Do you go through my trash?
Please. I go through everyone's trash.